You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Well, hopefully you all can. Welcome to the Truth, Honour and Integrity show. And we've done so many groundbreaking shows on many topics, must listen to, and ordinary shows, which has revealed so much on so many levels that is difficult to grasp and understand for many. And often the gist behind the barrier to truth is, how far can a person go with it before the inevitable barrier raises its ugly head and the fear kicks in? This often then leads to the receiver attacking and projecting at the messenger, and it is a classic sign of being triggered by the truth that is often hard to accept. All listening to our shows will have gone through several of those barriers at different intervals, but many of you have pushed on through them and also come out the other side with a far clearer, if not pleasant at times, view of life and how things work on this planet. Some of the things we have covered are barely believable. Some of the heinous acts done to and on us also, as people's perception barrier of how bad the dark can be, were in all cases set too low. This is in essence a defence mechanism, and the only way to overcome that defence is to keep listening, keep absorbing, and keep connecting the dots. A common saying recently to me is, your shows enlighten me but also terrify me, as if what you're saying with the show is that everything is a lie. The whole world view is a lie. Politics and religion a lie. Money a lie. And if that's the case, that scares me shitless. I do get that, and I also understand it. But no solutions can be provided to fix any situation without knowing the full story and picture. That story and picture was denied to us for so long now, and has reduced us in terms of knowledge, and dare I say it, actions as well, to the level of children. That is now being corrected, and today I will present another deep topic that strips bare much of the hidden world and knowledge denied to us all. This is not some made-up story. This is an actual 100% bona fide proof document. All of it has been transcribed, as it's not easy to read, given it is an old document, and interjected with updated, deeper levels of knowledge and background by myself. This is the real story of the Roswell incident, and also the unknown crash that followed it. Will all be revealed today, and in a part 2 to follow. Well, most certainly not. So before we begin the main story and all the juicy details, one must go into the background of it all first, to then understand the flow of the narrative. And so we begin with the first topic tonight or today, depending on where you are around the world, of the classification of the security clearances. The ultra top secret classification utilised in this briefing paper is a Defence Intelligence Agency and Pentagon designation. Other agencies and or departments of various military and executive divisions will use another form of security level nomenclature. All accession is by presidential authority only, and the following cross-reference of departmental designation for the reader's information only also. And these are the clearance levels for each division. Department of the Army, top secret, or Red 1, STA/R-1. Looks a bit like Stargate 1 to me. Department of the Air Force, top secret, SIOP/ESI, or top secret, SCI. Department of the Navy, top secret ultra, level S or code 4. National Security Agency, top secret ultra or above top secret. The CIA, top secret or red level alpha. The Department of State, MS provision exempt /NSPE classified. Now, after the Eisenhower presidency and his meetings in the early 1950s with the off-world entities on more than one occasion at Holloman Air Force Base, the presidents were all discounted after that and deemed too low in the security clearance to give them this level of information. President Kennedy tried to change that in 1963, November the 11th, with an agreement with his Russian counterpart to release all ET and UFO related files down to government level. This in part was confirmed by the document signed by Kennedy one day later on November the 12th, 1963, to the director of the CIA requesting that the CIA release all of the files. Now, it's also my understanding of why both JFK, although there were other reasons for him, and Marilyn Monroe were killed, as her and JFK were taken to a base to view craft and bodies, and she began to talk about it too much. Now, the Department of Navy clearances were rather interesting, I thought. The letter S and code 4 are linked. The facility at Area 51 is known as S4 and has been referred to by Bob Lazar and many others. Area 51 ceased as a base of operations in 2013 following some interesting interactions there, and operations moved to Area 52, known as Dugway, Utah. There are tunnels that exist between White Sands, Groom Lake, Dulce, Creed, Durango, Silverton and Dugway, all running under the Rocky Mountains, that have existed for a very long time. Area 51 also links to Catalina Island, or did, and is linked directly into Atlanta also, which is then linked to the main shipping port in Georgia, which is Savannah. There are more miles of navigable tunnels below our feet than roads on the surface. Next category, objectives. Operation Majestic 12, or Magic 12, spelt with a J, or MJ12, is an above top secret research and development intelligence operation responsible directly and only to the President of the United States. Like I said earlier, that was discounted after the 50s. Operations of the project are carried out under the control of the Magic 12 Group, which was established by Special Classified Executive Order 092447 by President Truman on September 1947, upon recommendation by Dr. Vannevar Bush and Secretary of Defence James Forrestal. The objectives of the group includes the evaluation of risk, control and containment of the violation of United States airspace and of the national security by unknown and possibly hostile aliens, one or more advanced races of beings presumed to have originated elsewhere than on planet Earth. The development of effective countermeasures and the applications of any scientific or technical discoveries made during the operations is also of the highest concern. And the following are some established aspects of the situation. 1. Advanced beings of non-human nature are continuously being detected along with their flying disc craft in the controlled space of the US since July the 7th, 1947. 2. The remains of 7 flying craft and the bodies of 27 deceased non-human beings have been recovered as of this briefing date and are at present being studied by the Magic 12 scientists. 3. Of the recovered craft are nearly intact, and one such machine has maintained some of its power since its retrieval in 1948. This was 1980s, by the way. Since 1957, no additional alien craft have been available for study. The assessment is that these beings have adapted or perfected the machines to the conditions of our world so as to avoid any further such revealing crashes. The reality is the truth got hidden deeper and deeper as compartmentalization of the program reached epic proportions, and out went the president and subsequently any congressional oversight view, and was taken over by the CIA, OSS, paperclip crew and Zionist-based scientists. As for the history of the Magic 12 group and its memberships and investigations, the complete records are available with proper clearance through the Office of Counterintelligence of the Defense Intelligence Agency and are also on microfilm at this time. The written minutes, the transcript of all directorate meetings, as well as a full record of all investigations in their original form, are located at MJ12 headquarters with the code name of Bigger Command and situated at the decommissioned Marden Air Force Section at Flat Rock, Nevada. This site is now under the coveting authority of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the story having been circulated widely that this base is involved in the long-term monitoring of residual radiation levels that resulted from A-bomb testing nearby in the 1950s. With the exception of a monitoring task unit at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for the sending up of all sightings referred through the Department of the Air Force, all gathering operations are now located at the Nevada site. Over a period of years, all recovered evidence from the crashed alien craft have been transported to underground storage at Flat Rock, making full use of the large complex of shelters built there starting in 1954. Scientific and technical research and analysis for Magic 12 is being conducted by aerosol planes around the country. Interesting term there. Small monitoring task units remain in place with the command structure of certain other branches of the Broad Forces. These include NORAD in Colorado and SAC in Nebraska, and for reporting odd radar sightings, and CCON in Virginia, and the Command Center in California is for reporting of naval encounters. The aeronautical research is being carried out by the Ardstone Arsenal in Alabama, and linguistic studies are conducted at NASA Ames Research in California. A team from Johns Hopkins University, I told you we'd mention them again after last Thursday's show. Yes, them again. And the National Institute of Health is deducing the biological and medical intelligence gathered by the project. Just as the title implies, Magic 12 is headed by a directorate of 12 persons chosen for life or until retirement. 6 are military and or administrative positions, and 6 are private sector scientists and engineers with long histories of governmental affiliations. All vacancies of the directorate are filled by a unanimous vote of tested directors. The President may recommend an appointment, but while all of the questions arising lies with this office, membership on the Magic 12 Directorate is exactly decided safely by that group. Such limitations of executive authority is a long-standing historical decision based on the care of these positions, and these 12 persons belong to a small family of highly skilled persons. Only from within such a family it is possible to have a group of special clearance required for this very specific type of work. It has been said by a former director of the group that a good understanding of alien minds requires an alien mind. So what is the organisation, or who? Well, the organisation structure of Operation Majestic 12 is arranged into 3 tiers or levels by order of a need-to-know information process, and these are the Directorate, composed of 12 members sharing equal authority and complete access to all information. The President is accepted to be the 13th member of this body. There they go again, 12 plus 1, as well as its final authority. Well, that didn't last too long, as that ended after President Eisenhower. Task units composed of variable number of scientific and information gathering groups and or persons. The complete listing of current consultants in the sciences is available on request. Identities of military monitoring units must be required through the Directorate. Enforcement. Composed primarily of selected recruits from the Army Special Forces Command. These units are organised into companies known as Blue Berets and are trained and supported by air cavalry units based out of Digger Command in Flat Rock, Nevada. Purposes include containment of tactical situations, control of public awareness, panic evacuation, etc. Originally created for the security of recovery sites during investigations and the transporting of sensitive evidence. The term Blue Berets kind of triggered this host, and it is another confirmation that the ET disclosure and also debunking program was all under the colour code program of Blue. Project Blue Book, Blue Beam, Blue Brethren Group, Blue Avians. And so the colour blue is designated as the program for off-world entities, or in the case of those just mentioned, distraction, lies and distortion of the facts. In particular, the fake Blue Avian narrative pushed by paid operatives David Wilcock and Corey Good. There is an avian race, more commonly associated with Thoth in the Egyptian hieroglyphs. They are Pleiadians and the origin of the Nibiru planet and story. And no, they were not good either, in terms of our interaction with them. So in respect of the term Blue Avian, is that blue is the colour code for the ET program, and the avians are one of the 5 groups that make up the Anunnaki. For further evidence of alternative media misinformation programs regarding ETs and UFOs will be revealed in this next paragraph from the document. Enforcement also includes a number of plain-clothed operatives whose purpose is the spread of cover stories to avoid public fears about the inability of the government to control the situation. Although quite why they always feel the need to control the situation is beyond me. These members also operate diversions for civilian investigators to discourage such efforts so as to aid in control of public information and interest. The identities of the Directorate Magic 12 are held in strictest secrecy. They are known only to each other and to the seated President of the United States. These names are to never be written down. The purpose and need for the highly covert and above top secret designation of this operation will become apparent with the study of the following reports, which led to the forming of Operation Majestic 12. Since the time of these events over 40 years ago, the state of our sciences has advanced to the degree that we may see a measure of short-sightedness in the then expedient actions of the administration. As a result of actions taken at that time, several sensitive developments have resulted which are of ever-increasing concern to the national security of the United States of America. National security of the United States of America is a misnomer if ever there was one. And really it is a cover-up act of covert and black budget operations by the CIA and others of their ilk. And the reality is there is no national security for the people or the country of America. The National Security Act, just like the CIA, formerly the OSS, was created due to the next chapter, as you will all see. Hi all and welcome back. There's some insight into the security clearances, which we've just covered before we go into the main story. Majestic 12 is essentially the highest clearance, bar 1, which is M. And there was 12. There is no Majestic 12 anymore. And there's only 4 people with that security clearance as it stands, one of which is this host. The one above, and the only one above, is Kim the trustee. Operation Roswell, July 7th, 1947, was a secret operation was begun to assure recovery of the wreckage of an unidentified flying object which had crashed at a remote site in New Mexico. The object was down approximately 75 miles northwest of Roswell Army Air Station, which was later renamed Walker Air Force Base and was reported to authorities there by a local rancher. During the recovery of the operation, aerial reconnaissance discovered that 4 alien-like beings had apparently ejected from the craft at some time before it had exploded. These had fallen to earth about 2 miles away from the crash site where the wreckage was located. All of the 4 alien crew members were dead and badly decomposed due to actions of predators and exposure to the elements during the approximately 1 week which had elapsed prior to their recovery. A special scientific team took charge of the removal of the bodies and the recovery of the wreckage of the craft. Civilian and military witnesses in the area were debriefed, and any reporters were given the effective cover story that a misguided weather balloon was responsible for the sighting. A cover analytical effort organised by General Nathan F. Twining and Dr. Vannevar Bush, sitting on the direct orders of President Harry S. Truman, resulted in a preliminary consensus on September the 19th, 1947, that the disc-shaped craft was most likely a short-range reconnaissance ship. This conclusion was based in the most part on the craft's size and the apparent lack of provisioning. A similar analysis of the 4 deceased occupants was arranged by Dr. Detlev Bronk. It was the tentative conclusion of the group on November the 30th, 1947, that although these aliens are generally human-like in appearance, the biological and evolutionary processes possible for their development has apparently been quite different from those observed or postulated in Homo sapiens or Earth humans. Dr. Bronk has generated the term, since then widely applied, of extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBEs for short, for these creatures until such time of a more definitive designation can be agreed upon. It was the opinions of the scientists involved in this investigation that this craft and its entities most certainly did not originate from on the Earth. The crash near Roswell occurred sometime in the evening of the 2nd or 3rd of July 1947 at about 20:47 hours Mountain Time. At least 24 persons in the area observed a bright yellow or sun-coloured disc-shaped object over the area. On July the 3rd, 1947, in the early afternoon, the widely scattered wreckage was discovered by local ranch manager William Brazel and also his son and daughter. Authorities at the Roswell Field Army Air Forces Base were alerted by Mr. Brazel at 9:18 on July the 7th, 1947, and the two officers of the base were guided to the crash site by the ranch manager. These were Major Jesse Marcel, Staff Intelligence Officer of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office, and Captains Lee Sains of the Counter-Intelligence Corps. When the two officers returned to Roswell Field with samples of the crash site material, they immediately reported to Colonel William Blanchard of Air Tactical Command. It was at this point that the first of many decisions were made that have gone into the historical posture of this government's position on the public's need to know about the situation. Colonel Blanchard released an official press statement confirming that wreckage of a flying disc had been recovered, and this was phoned into an Albuquerque, New Mexico radio station without approval from higher level command in the Army Air Corps. Indeed, no one in the Pentagon or anywhere else was notified or consulted prior to the release of this information. And as a footnote, the CIA was created just 9 weeks after this crash, and they took over all investigations. In defence of Colonel Blanchard's actions, it should be noted that no established procedure on the issue existed at the time. There were no Office of Special Investigation, CIA, National Security Agency, Defence Intelligence Agency, or any other similar such organisations at that time. It should be noted that within less than 2 years following this incident, and as its direct result, all of the above agencies were established, with the exception of the Defence Intelligence Agency, which was chartered in 1961. At nearly the same time, on the evening of July the 7th, 2 events were taking the incident in widely different directions at widely separated locations. In Roswell, Major Marcel was ordered by Colonel Blanchard to load the debris on board an aircraft and fly it to Wright Field, now Wright-Patterson, at Dayton, Ohio for examination. As this was being done, a reporter from the Albuquerque radio station called to Wright Field to confirm the crash with the commanding general there. This was Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, Air Material Command, where any such reported incidents should have been filled in fact. The wreckage and all persons involved were already on the way to Wright Field. But this was the first that General Twining had heard of the matter, and Twining was forced to state that he knew nothing of a crashed disc craft. Upon finally receiving a verbal confirmation by open telephone line from Lieutenant Colonel Blanchard at Roswell Field, General Twining did 3 things in rapid order in an effort to contain the situation. First, he sent special orders by secure teletype to Blanchard at Roswell, instructing them to do nothing and talk to no one until further orders came from him. General Twining used the same system to contact General Roger Ramey, who was in command at Carswell Army Air Force Base at Fort Worth, Texas, ordering him to direct Major Marcel to vector a meeting for an intermediate stop at Carswell which was on his flight path. General Ramey was instructed to A. remove the recovered debris off Marcel's aircraft and place it on board another in sealed crates to be forwarded to Wright Field, and B. order Marcel and his crew not to talk to reporters. C. notify the press of a photo conference to be held at Carswell, where an explanation would be given. D. state at the conference that the wreckage was only the remains of a weather balloon and its attached tinfoil radar target, and prominently display created evidence of the same. Then return Major Marcel at once to Roswell Field, and then General Twining to have an open teletype to the newsrooms at the 2 Albuquerque radio stations to cease transmission of the original story and to contact the Carswell Office of Public Information for the correct release, the cover story. Finally, the General boarded a plane and flew directly to Roswell Field in New Mexico. At his arrival in Roswell, General Twining relieved Colonel Blanchard and took command and ordered troops to set up a secure perimeter around the reported crash site. He then personally supervised the total policing of the area and removal of all remaining evidence, as well as the 4-day briefing of Major Marcel and the 6-day debriefing of the rancher William Brazel, upon which he was held incommunicado until the cleanup was complete. Hostage. The wreckage recovered at Roswell consisted of 327 fragmented pieces of various structural debris. The most prominent amongst these were beams of many lengths and ranging in diameter and thickness from just over half an inch to just under 2 inches. These were found to be composed of a very light and porous metal alloy composed of extremely pure aluminum and silicon mixed with zirconium with a certain crystalline structure. The beams were flexible and were absolutely unaffected by both oxyacetylene and oxyhydrogen blowpipe torches. Several of these contained hieroglyphic and alphabetic markings of unknown type placed onto their surfaces. Also found were many pieces of a metallic foil-like material presumed to have been the outer casing of the craft's shell or skin. Now, following the discoveries near Roswell, New Mexico, it became obvious to the intelligence officers working under the newly appointed Secretary of Defense, James V. Forrestal, that a special operations group was going to be needed to coordinate the accumulation and dissemination of data on this subject. The original directorate of the group were as follows: Dr. Lloyd Berkner, Scientist and Executive Secretary of the Joint Research and Development Board in 1946 under Dr. Vannevar Bush, and also headed the Special Committee to establish the Weapons System Evaluation Group. He was also scientific consultant to the CIA on UFOs during his years with MJ-12. Dr. Detlev Bronk, internationally known physiologist and biophysicist, who is chairman of the National Research Council and the Medical Advisory Board of the Atomic Energy Commission, chairman of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Brookhaven National Laboratory. Dr. Vannevar Bush, recognized as one of the United States' leading scientists, organized the National Defense Research Council in 1941 and the Office of Scientific Research and Development in 1943, which led to the wartime establishment of the Manhattan Project to the first atomic bomb. After the war, he became head of the Joint Research and Development Board and was responsible for the recommendation, along with Secretary Forrestal, to President Truman that the Majestic 12 operation was required. Dr. Bush was a principal organizer of the efforts to bring many German scientists, including Albert Einstein, to the US before and after the war. Now, that last snippet is the evidence I mentioned earlier. All those involved in this were the Paperclip crew, which increased rapidly after this event, involving all the Zionist-led Black Eagle SS group out of Germany and other regions close by. The name Bush, one wonders if that is some sort of title rather than a surname, because some European nobility come under the name of Ramesses Paiso Bush, and Vannevar has no relation to the two Georges who later became president here, despite a government ruling denying the Bush family from engaging in anything related to the American government back in the 1940s, after the treasonous acts by their father and grandfather, Prescott Bush. It also needs to be noted that Bush is not their original name either. It was Scherf, involved in and with the SS, and that George Sr., it is reputed to be the son of Nikola Tesla's accountant. Either way, this name Bush looks more and more like a title than an official surname. James V. Forrestal served as Secretary of the Navy before he became Secretary of Defense under Truman in July 1947. Among his first acts of Defense Secretary was the responsibility for organizing the crash recovery of the flying discs from Roswell, New Mexico, which occurred the same month he took office. He was the first to approach President Truman about the need for an operation like MJ-12 and was in charge, along with Dr. Bush, of setting up an international intelligence gathering organization to monitor worldwide UFO activity. The results of these efforts would grow to include the CIA and NSA, both of which were founded shortly after the Roswell and other crashes. That decision set this country on a path to totalitarian control, with the implementation and creation of these two agencies, neither of which have any benefit for the people or the country of America. Both have used the National Security Act to their full advantage and to cover up serious crimes they took part in around the globe. Now, this next portion is an all too common occurrence when the CIA is involved in anything as well. As a direct result of the circumstances surrounding the Aztec, New Mexico recovery, Secretary Forrestal suffered a mental breakdown in March 1949 and was admitted to Bethesda Naval Hospital. I hope I said that right. Under the cover story of needing a routine physical checkup. Bethesda Hospital is actually a CIA MKUltra mind control facility. While he was at that facility, he is supposed to have committed suicide by jumping from an upper story window in May 1949, and a special committee of counterintelligence of the CIA later concluded that the highest probability is having been either drugged, tricked or pushed into his fatal fall. Frank Olson died in the exact same circumstances, and alleged involvement of the CIA and these two cases being murder, not suicide, persist to this day. Perhaps this official CIA document of assassinations will give you more clues or ideas of what took place. Accidents. For secret assassination, either simple or chase, the contrived accident is the most effective technique. When successfully executed, it causes little excitement and is only casually investigated. The most efficient accident in a simple assassination is a fall of 75 feet or more onto a hard surface. Elevator shafts, stairwells, unscreened windows and bridges will serve. Bridge falls into water are not reliable. In simple cases, a private meeting with the subject may be arranged at a property or a properly cased location, and the act may be executed by sudden, vigorous excise of the ankles, tipping the subject over the edge. If the assassin immediately sets up an outcry, playing the horrified witness, no alibi or surreptitious withdrawal is necessary. In chase cases, it will usually be necessary to stun or drug the subject before dropping him. Care is required to ensure that no wound or condition not attributed to the fall is discernible after death. Unreal. The presumed reason for this involves details of the Aztec crash, not the same as the Roswell one, which will follow in that section. Gordon Gray, Assistant Secretary of the Army at the time of MJ-12 initialization, and the Secretary of the Army in 1949. In 1950, he was appointed as a Special Assistant on National Security Affairs to President Truman. In 1951, he headed the Psychological Strategy Board for Unidentified Flying Object Impact, PSB-UF-01, under CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith. Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, Third Director of Central Intelligence, DCI, from 1947 to 1950. The founding Director of the CIA, established in September 1947 to direct international information gathering on UFOs. I suspect this is what created what is known as Five Eyes. Was covertly placed on the board of directors of the civilian UFO organization National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, to monitor their activities and control of the release of their information to the public. So they had trolls in 1947. he was forced to take an early retirement, Mr. Hillenkoetter, after he broke security, making the public statement that UFOs were real, and through a process of official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are now known as nonsense. In defence of his position, it must be noted that by this time, the events of the Aztec, New Mexico recovery and the death of Secretary Forrestal had depressed and demoralised most of the original members of the investigating group. By 1951-52, MJ-12 had to be entirely reconstructed due to the feelings of many of the directorate that the public had a right to know the facts. Reconstructed in their world often means they were assassinated. Dr. Jeremy Hunsaker, aircraft designer and head of the Departments of Mechanical and Aeronautical Engineering at MIT, chairman of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, was in charge of studies of the machined portions of the debris recovered from the crash sites. He was an expert in X-ray microscopic metals analysis. Dr. Donald Menzel, director of Harvard, no surprise, College Observatory and a consultant to the NSA on astronomy. He held a top-secret ultra clearance. Who knew the NSA had a division for astronomy? But then who knows why the NSA actually exists to begin with, when we have 16 other... Excuse me. That has to be turned down. No surprise there. And alert. So, who knows why the NSA, maybe that was them chiming in, actually exists to begin with when we have 16 other agencies here, the majority of which is duplicated and triplicated work. As the British OSS morphed into the CIA, the British GCHQ was morphed into the NSA, which is a subsidiary of the CHQ-based organisation. General Robert Montague, base commander at the Atomic Energy Commission installation at Sandia Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico, from July 47 through February 1951, was reassigned and transferred following a heated disagreement over the national policy of MJ-12 regarding sightings around nuclear research facilities. He felt the risk to the public health was of greater use than security and control of the situation. Someone with a bit of sense, oh my. Rear Admiral Sidney Sowers, the first Director of Central Intelligence, DCI, from January to June 1946, and upon initialization of MJ-12 he became Executive Secretary of the National Security Council in order to control domestic security of UFO information. Following the Aztec, New Mexico recovery and related actions, Sowers resigned in 1950 his positions in national security and his commission in the Navy. He was retained as a consultant on security to the executive branch. General Nathan Twining, the principal ramrod for high security in the matter of unidentified flying objects and an opponent of scientific release of data or the involvement of civilian scientists. Twining was an outstanding commander of bombing operations in both the Pacific and European theatres in World War II. In 1945 he was appointed Commanding General of Air Materiel Command based at Wright Field, which is now Wright-Patterson. He organised Project Sign and Project Grudge, which later became Project Blue Book, to control and discredit civilian sightings and civilian investigations. And you all thought Project Blue Book was about disclosure. Well, there you have it. No, it wasn't. Chief proponent of covert investigation and clandestine contact attempts regarding UFOs and the EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities. General Hoyt Vandenberg, after an outstanding career in the Army Air Forces, was appointed the second Director of Central Intelligence in 1946 until May 1947. Following the Aztec, New Mexico incident, he joined General Twining in supporting the sensitive nature of releasing any UFO information to the public. When the Air Technical Intelligence Center published its top-secret estimate of the situation, indicating the belief that UFOs were interplanetary in origin, in August of 1948. General Vandenberg ordered the document burned before it could be distributed to government scientists with the required clearance. And this was directly related to the outcome of the Aztec investigation, which began in March of the same year, 1948. It is possible to disclose the identities of the original MJ-12 directorate because they are now all deceased. It is necessary in order to understand the climate of confusion and anxiety resulting from the second recovery incident at Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. Just when you thought you have heard it all, the next part reveals more, and you ain't seen nothing yet. You ain't seen nothing yet, or heard. Well, the rest of this show will be a lot more revealing now the background is out the way. And most of you all listening to this show will be familiar with the Roswell incident in July of 1947. But what is less known is the second recovery of a craft just outside the village of Aztec, New Mexico, on the 550 road, and approximately 10 to 15 miles from the southern border of Colorado. This next part will cover the Aztec, New Mexico incident on the 25th of March 1948. So on that date, at approximately 16:19 hours Mountain Standard Time, a disc-shaped flying machine came down about 12 miles northwest of the small community of Aztec, New Mexico. The controlled landing occurred in a small desert canyon on the private grazing land of a local farmer and rancher. The approach of the disc was tracked with the aid of 3 high-powered missile tracking radar stations belonging to the recovery network of the White Sands Test Range and located in classified areas of southwest New Mexico. The disc craft was observed in violation of the restricted airspace of this facility, and the disc was flying on a level glide path and on a heading from southwest to northeast at about 3,200 feet altitude when first detected. This track detections resulted in an Air Defence Command alert that included the scrambling of squadrons of jet interceptors from the nearby Sandia and also White Sands bases. Also, per a recent memorandum issued through Operation Majestic, the Commander-in-Chief of Air Defence Command, CIC-ADC, immediately notified the Secretary of State General, George C. Marshall. At 17:53 hours Mountain Time, the disc craft appeared to lose both speed and altitude, at nearly the exact moment that it was triangulated by returns from all three radar dish antennae, in an effort to vector the interceptor squadrons towards their target. At the time, it seemed to be an evasive tactic on the part of the disc craft. The current assessment is that the microwaves from these long-range radars almost certainly evidenced a damage to the power or flight control systems of the disc craft. At 18:02 Mountain Time, the craft dropped below radar for some 4 minutes before the White Sands Jet Squadron would have reached the intercept point and then engaged the disc craft. Estimates later indicated that the disc craft impacted or landed at approximately 18:19 hours Mountain Time. The exact position of the landing zone was determined within minutes by calculation of the last radar triangulated tracks and confirmed by a visual flyover of interceptors from the White Sands base. The landing zone was at the bottom of Hart Canyon, H-A-R-T, a dry wash area about 12.2 miles northeast of Aztec, New Mexico, and 2.3 miles northwest of the Cave Creek Bend in the Animas River. This was on private land about 1.7 miles north of the state highway and nearly half a mile west of an unpaved county road S141 South. At 18:26 Mountain Time on March the 25th, 1948, the crash site was visually confirmed by the commander of the 152 Tactical Fighter Wing and relayed to the Air Defense Command officer at Sandia Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico. This information was then conveyed at once to the CIC ADC, who contacted the Secretary of State Marshall. By 18:35 hours, General Marshall had made contact with the Army Air Force's Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. The Army Air Force's Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, which will be later known as IPU, a section of the Army Counter-Intelligence Directorate. The IPU was maintained and supported out of nearby Camp Kobe. I'm not too sure on that name because it was rather difficult to read some parts of the document, which is in Colorado, and was the closest group able to secure, recover, transport and store a disabled disc craft. This action was entirely correct in the interval before a Majestic operation could be activated, and the preparations of the IPU group while awaiting a Majicops crew saved valuable time. Majicops, Majicops. The IPU was forced out after the Roswell, New Mexico crash recovery and was later absorbed into the Enforcement Division of Operation Majestic at the time that the Department of the Air Force was established as an entity separate from the US Army. The disk craft was recovered and the landing zone declared secured by 22:45 hours Mountain Time through the actions of an IPU scout team sent to the Hart Canyon area. Meanwhile, General Marshall had contacted Dr. Vannevar Bush, the scientific head of Majicops, and a joint IPU Majicops team was assembled under MJ-12 command for the purpose of investigating and clearing the landing zone or crash site. The local rancher who owned the land and property were held incommunicado while the field analysis and subsequent cleanup was conducted at Hart Canyon. Visiting with the rancher at that time and place was people who were there to hunt for game animals on his land, and they were the owner of a local radio repair shop, plus an unemployed oil hunter and inventor. These last two parties were later to get together and tell their story to a columnist from Variety magazine named Frank Scully. This author later published a book in 1950 detailing parts of the Aztec recovery story. This breach of security was eschewed by the use of a cover story for the IPU Majicops work that proved to be ineffective at the time. It was decided to disguise the Aztec efforts as an exploration for oil by a fictional drilling company, a fact that was not in agreement with the knowledge of the unemployed oil hunter who knew there was no oil in that area. Later, both this independent oil hunter and the columnist Scully were discredited by facts leaked to a writer at True magazine by covert operatives of the Majestic Enforcement Division. This action, in the report it was said, was unfortunate but very vital in light of the sensational nature of the Aztec discoveries. Fortunately, Scully labelled this fortune-hunting oilsman as a scientist in his book. They always look for a bit of leverage to discredit. I know that better than anyone. And during the period of the book sales, this adventurer was convicted of fraud for trying to peddle a device he claimed would find oil. You see how they work? They said it was mostly that device was to be found by luck, and the security breach healed itself and the book was quickly forgotten with only minor help from MJ-12. This is what has gone on since these craft started landing, deliberately or otherwise. A select few can know, and the rest of the world who have had valid sightings and experiences are all declared frauds, criminals, jailed, sent to mental facilities, discredited, killed or ridiculed beyond all reason within their own circle. And this is why I have a healthy dislike for the anti-disclosure elements within the UFO community, likes of Wilcock, Good, Greer and many others. The lifelong damage done to people who have had these experiences, which is deeply disturbing in many ways in and of itself, only to have these self-appointed jackasses add whole new levels of turmoil to people who have had genuine experiences, I find beyond unforgivable and disgusting. That evening of March 15th, General Marshall ordered ADC off of alert status and requested that they send teletypes to the radar stations advising them that there had been a false alarm. Time was an important factor here, since the disc craft had landed intact and had the appearance of having been landed under the control of its operators. No signs of entry was immediately observed, and the IPU scout team considered it possible that some of the crew of the disc craft might still be alive inside of it. At 01:26 hours Mountain Time, March 16th, the team of Majestic 12 scientists assembled by Dr. Bush arrived at Durango Airfield, Colorado, about 35 miles northwest of Aztec. All operators of the teams of IPU and Magicops investigators were then sworn to an ultra top secret security oath. Not clearance, oath. All personal property and identification was left in location at Durango, and the 3 unmarked trucks headed for the Hart Canyon site. It must be remembered that at that time the helicopter was still in experimental development at this stage, and trucks were the best means of entering rugged terrain, as well as the fact that they would cause far less attention than the noisy and unfamiliar helicopter, which was, however, used to bring in the initial IPU scout team. In order to fully follow the course of the Aztec recovery and investigation, it is important at this point to detail the names and the grounds of the members of the IPU Magicops team before returning to a chronology of the events at Hart Canyon. Only 4 of these persons were on the Magicops Directorate. These were Dr. Lloyd Berkner, Dr. Detlev Bronk, Dr. Vannevar Bush, and Jerome Hunsaker. The following were selected by the MJ-12 Directorate to accompany the IPU Magicops team to the Hart Canyon landing site. Dr. Carl A. Helland, Director and Senior Scientist of Geophysics and Magnetic Science Laboratory of the Colorado School of Mines, was instrumental in discovering that sections of the Aztec disc craft were held together by molecular magnetic bonding along finely polished seams, and determined a means for its disassembly. Dr. John von Neumann, double N at the end, gives it away, former consultant on the Manhattan Project in 1943 and a close personal friend of Dr. Bush and Oppenheimer from the same project. He was an expert in both mathematics and computing machines. You all thought computers was the 80s and 90s. His work on the Aztec disk eventually led to the binary computer language used today in all modern electronic computers. Oh my. So ET's created the ones and zeros then. Just who will become clear later. Dr. Robert J. Oppenheimer was director of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton University from 1947, after a distinguished period of service during the war at the head of the Los Alamos atomic bomb project. Becoming a pattern there, isn't it? Manhattan and an atomic bomb all involved in MJ-12. Also, he was chairman of the General Advisory Committee of the Atomic Energy Commission, acting for his friend Dr. Bush, who had not yet arrived at Aztec. He selected most of the recovery team members and arranged with the US Navy for storage in their facilities at Los Alamos while permanent sites could be prepared. Dr. Johann von Rosler. Yes, again, name indicative. For those of you familiar with our show. An expert nitrogen chemist whose work led to the development of nitrogen mustard gas, nitroglycerin derivatives leading to TNT, and worked with Dr. Bush and Oppenheimer on triggering devices for the atomic bomb. Nice chap then. Not. Originally included as a consultant on the possible need for gained forced entry to the disk craft by use of high explosives. Jackasses. He eventually worked with Dr. Detlev Bronk on investigating the liquid nitrogen coped cryogenic suspension system used aboard the disk craft by its crew members. Cryogenic. Dr. Merle A. Tuve worked with Bush and Oppenheimer of the Office of Scientific Research and Development and the Manhattan Project, there it is again, during World War II. He was a top pioneer in, quote, radio wave propagation in the upper atmosphere. A top pioneer in radio wave propagation in the upper atmosphere. Sounds like the HAARP developer to me. Dr. Merle A. Tuve. Later, he was part of the Bell Laboratories team, which developed the principles of laser light physics derived from studies of systems found aboard the Aztec disk craft. Dr. Horace van Valkenburg. As a footnote, both von and van are a title of nobility. Hello, Miss von Reitz. Was director of the School of Metallurgy at the University of Colorado and an expert in analytical chemistry, which was useful in determining proper materials, including of components of the Aztec disk craft during the investigation and also its disassembly. Later, he pioneered the science of X-ray crystallography, crystal holography, and electron microscopic metals analysis, as well as the holder of 30 patents through Arizona State University in metal alloy processes. Most of the above were the results of research he began after his analysis of the structural materials of the disk craft. Yes, and another reason for this level of secrecy is so these self-appointed people can and have gained extensive advanced technology, ideas and patents for their own self-greed. You know, given the vast sums of money handed over by the taxpayer, various agencies and NGOs created all harvesting vast sums of the American taxpayers' money and also subsequent government budgets, and yet the public have received little to nothing in a way of return on their funding. Not only that, we've endured endless lies and ridicule, and also the fact that most of the technology garnered from these events that have been made available to the public were all weaponized against us to boot. The cost of these operations must run into multi-trillions of dollars by now, and many rights and freedoms have been trampled over to keep this all a secret. Although not present during the recovery phase of the Aztec operation in Hart Canyon, it is important we acknowledge the contributions made later by Lambros Kalthamos and William Friedman, who are experts in language and cryptology and whose analysis of the writings and symbols found aboard the craft led to a degree of understanding of the cryogenic suspension system that was used to freeze the ship's occupants. Also, Paul A. Scherrer, whose supply of refrigeration and nitrogen cooling and pumping equipment helped greatly in the part of the suspended occupants aboard the Discraft at the field laboratory set up at Los Alamos. Both Kalthamos and Friedman went on to work for Operation Majestic for many years in our covert operations section of the Enforcement Division as deep planted agents with the NSA. Dr. Scherrer led an illustrious career as Research and Development Director of the Air Research Corp. The IPU Magicops convoy took routes to the Hart Canyon site that avoided many main roads or any main roads, and on arrival they set up roadblocks and secured a 2-mile perimeter around the canyon rim and the landing site. In exchange for his silence, private land was leased from the farmer who owned the field in Hart Canyon for the construction of a controlled access road to and from the area. Equipment carrying trucks were camouflaged to look like oil and gas drilling rigs, and personnel involved wore coveralls with the name of a fictional oil exploration firm created by Magicops for this purpose. Later, a fence was constructed around the perimeter of the canyon and bore the name of the same oil company and warnings of blasting on signs attached to it. When the time came for the removal and restoration of the site, trucks were used that were labelled high explosives and were escorted by Blue Berets or National Guardsmen. The cover story, which was very effective in keeping the ex-pious away, was spread that these trucks were removing large amounts of nitroglycerin used in the blasting during oil explorations. And this was the reason given to the National Guard escort, that the governor of the state requested the escort to avoid the theft of explosives. Unbelievable. Shortly after sunrise on March 26, 1948, the IPU Magic Ops team began operations at the Hart Canyon location. Measurements of the radiation levels around the craft and the landing site were taken and proved negative. Some high concentration of potassium chlorate powder was detected in soil samples surrounding the disk craft, and a fine yellowish dust composed of particles less than 5 microns in diameter was detected, coating the nearby underbrush. Chemical analysis showed that this was composed of sulfurous substances in an unfamiliar combination, having a bivalent rhombic crystalline structure, and was mixed with an unknown and extremely high electropositive element in the iodide group. It is now known that this was a form of disinfectant automatically discharged by the craft upon any touchdown to a planet's bioactive soil. Oh my, an environmentally friendly craft. Now there's a novel idea, NASA. Jackasses. Linear calibration surveys were taken by theodolite surveyors transit, and photographs were taken from every possible angle with a Graflex 4-inch by 5-inch plate camera equipped with special calibration overlay masks to register dimensions on the film. The ship was determined to be 99.983 feet in diameter, nearly 100 foot in diameter, 42.638 feet in height or thickness, including the 9.451 foot extension of the landing pod supporting it off the ground. These 3 round hemispheric pods beneath the craft had obviously been extended from within the hull during a controlled landing effort. These were measured to form the points of an equilateral triangle, 22.3 feet on a side, centre to centre, and were 16.45 feet each from the epicenter of the craft's bottom hull. Both upper and lower hull surfaces were smooth, with no means of entry or even of propulsion immediately in evidence. The hull was of a colour of dull, unpolished aluminium, and was apparently metallic in nature with a normal surface temperature. No seams, hatches, rivets or portals were obvious. Photographs taken closer than 15 feet were found to be blurred. Later, both infrared and magnetic radiation fields were found to surround the craft and were no doubt responsible for fogging of the films in close photographs. Watches and other ferric, which is iron, tools and instruments left within this zone around the craft were found to become magnetized. Eventually the team crawled across the upper hull surface with access by a scaffold erected around one side of the craft. Upon conducting a close examination, they discovered a small hairline crack at the base of a slight bulge in the domed top of the upper hull. Careful study determined this crack to be irregular enough as to be a result of an accidental impact with a solid object. Much later, a civilian witness was debriefed in Albuquerque who testified that he observed the craft strike the side of a cliff along the south bank of the Animas River at about the same time the saucer ship dropped below the radar. After banging on the hull and calling through a loudspeaker failed to receive any response from the presumed occupants of the disc craft, it was decided to attempt to widen this crack in an attempt to gain entry. If you believe it, don't keep it all inside. So, having established their security and perimeters and all kinds of other skullduggery, they got to a point where what happens next? What is inside? It must have been quite an extraordinary experience. Heightened adrenaline, excitement and fear all mixed into one. But at first the discussion was held as to the possibilities of the craft's internal atmosphere being explosive, or that air could be poison for the occupants to breathe. And eventually Dr. Bush waived all such debate on the grounds that if some action was not taken immediately, any chance for survival of members of the ship's crew would run out with the passage of time. They first tried with blowpipes, was applied in excess of 10,000 degrees, which didn't work. And finally, a diamond tip drill bits were used until the crack was at least extended longitudinally and finally widened into a gap great enough to shine a small electric light inside and then look around. Another plate of material of similar construction seemed to be solidly blocking the view. However, at a seam along the bottom of the panel, another breach was located. It was then assumed that the craft was constructed of both an inner and outer hull, separated only by a few inches. After many minutes of more effort, the drill broke through into another empty space. Upon extending this opening and looking in, the research team were surprised to discover the interior to be well illuminated with sunlight. It was discovered that the original opening was forced at the lower corner, and a sort of large rectangular window or porthole which had been cracked. These portholes were not visible from the outside, but were extended all the way around the compartment in huge curved rectangles and separated by only a thin structural brace between them. The exception was the cracked one by which the team gained entry. It had turned a milky translucent colour like frosted glass. Later testing showed that the entire outer hull was covered in this transparent material that was then blocked off by an opaque inner hull where desired by the ship's designers. This was a thin and inflexible skin barely thicker than 4 sheets of typing paper, and yet direct blows from sledgehammers would not dent or rupture this foil-like substance. After experimentation with a long, thin rod to probe what looked like levers or buttons inside, a panel in the lower hull extended down along what seemed like invisible seams and became a ramp leading up into the craft. When calling out provided no reply, the team obtained flashlights and other equipment and entered the disk craft. The greatest discoveries were made on the lower level, dubbed the cargo hold, but the team of investigators did not immediately find the closed door or hatch to this compartment. Instead, they found themselves in a small circular chamber about the size of an elevator cab. A spiral ramp of a very steep incline led us around a centre post to the upper chamber, dubbed the flight deck. Since the team had already observed some details of this upper chamber and had observed the bodies of two small creatures slumped in chairs, it was decided to investigate these first in case they might be alive. Inside the upper cabin room, the team found the bodies of two small humanoids about 4 feet in height and strapped into seats like those in a jet cockpit, known as acceleration couches, which faced a row of instrument panels built into a curved countertop circling the cabin just below the portholes. They had been seen from the outside. The extraterrestrials were then determined to be dead. Later study determined that the normal atmosphere inside the cabin was much thinner and colder than our air. When the crack in the window frame appeared and happened, the two pilots died from sudden increase in pressure and temperature, which caused thin hemorrhages like bruises and gave a brownish hue to their skin that at first seemed like burns. The seats holding the bodies were found to adjust to fit almost any human form and to glide around a track in the floor that followed the instrument panels. The group soon recognized that the instrument panels were active and some symbols were backlit by a blue-green glow. Some of these were changing as they watched. At this point, Dr. Oppenheimer consulted with Dr. von Neumann and suggested that the team proceed with extreme caution, since the craft was obviously still under some form of power and it might be activated from within or without by radio control. Dr. Tuve suggested that the team should explore the construction of the controls rather than attempt to operate them, on the chance of being able to trace the power to its source and deactivate the same, until some understanding of the purpose of each instrument could be determined. This was agreed upon and the work began. Amongst the first discoveries was that each panel of instruments in the flight deck countertop slid out like a drawer along invisible lines less than 0.2 millimeters wide, and in a track or rail composed of a single strip of plastic wrapped in a continuous S-curve around two metal rollers at the front and the rear. There were no ball bearings, springs or motors, and yet each drawer slid both open and shut at the slightest touch of a fingertip, as if it was self-powered. Later it was found that the rear roller bar travelled back and forth on a track of its own as the drawer was operated. This second track was curved so as to balance the force imported by the bond in the plastic strip and thus created an almost frictionless mechanism. The type of plastic was then unknown to earthly science, but has since been developed and has what is known as molecular memory of its ideal unstressed state, to which it will naturally return. Funny, we've never seen any of that. Later it was determined that each section of the controls or instrument board, this craft was self-contained as to its power needs, by some means integrated into its nuclear structure that gathered electromagnetic and other energy from the space around it, in this case the fields of the Earth. There was no control power system anywhere on the ship, and the control, flight and environmental systems drew their power from unknown sources. Instrumentation was eventually found to interconnect and communicate with each other on the molecular level by means of waves or vibrations set up in the atomic structure of each device. No wires or other recognizable electrical components were found. The sections of the saucer hull, which contained both upper and lower deck cabins, were joined along microscopic lines by means of electromagnetic locking action, which was engineered into their molecular structure. When Dr. Bush and a team of military engineers found several interlocking key-like devices in a cabinet built into the wall, Dr. Helland determined that these could be used to dismantle the craft into sections. At the joints, the operator of the keys, which linked together for different sized tasks, by simply passing the tool over the seam. The device, which looked like a tuning fork, had each time magnetized with opposite polarity, unlocked the joint when passed over it in one direction, and rejoined the sections when it was drawn in the other direction. Even after disassembly and prolonged storage, the separate sections of this craft still maintain their power and operating capabilities to this day. 1987. All attempts to alter the magnetic fields that connect sections of the craft, performed with the use of powerful electromagnets under exacting laboratory conditions, have failed to change the degree of the interlocking effect. Also, kinetic force, repeated blows, has failed to alter molecular magnetic alignment, according to crystal holographic imaging units recently conducted. The entire inner hull structure was built over a lightweight framework of flexible beams supporting the two front cabins, and formed into pie-shaped equal thirds around a single central shaft or pole running through the thickness of the craft, and connecting the upper and lower outer hulls, which was divided into equal thirds. The pole running through the saucer was about 41 feet long and about 16 inches in diameter. It was a perfect cylinder of a solid carbon zinc alloy. That pole, when maintained or stored in a vertical position, the pole has no special power capabilities. but when laid down at the Hart Canyon site on its side, the pole began to drain electrical current from machines, generators and batteries, and to broadcast a powerful magnetism which damages sensitive instruments and magnetized tools. So for safety purposes, it had to be transported in an upright fashion. Many other discoveries were made, including 3 different styles of writing. First, a form of symbolic pictographs. Second, an alphabetic style of pictograph which seemed to break down the complex drawings into words. And third, a form that looked like the raised symbols in the Braille lettering for the blind, but was different. Much later, Calthamos and Friedman showed this last form to be a sort of mathematical code based on binary counting and was read from right to left like Hebrew. Oh my. Binary and Hebrew connotations. Mathematical code, which is geometria, all of which stemmed from the off-world group, and connected in particular to one group to which the Hebrew language, traditions, books and religions all emanated from, the Anunnaki. But the most important discoveries were made on the lower level cabin, which the team labelled the cargo hold. While attempting to take apart some of the panels in the lower entry chamber, the team discovered a hatchway that disappeared so well when closed that they overlooked it earlier. It was opened and closed by touching a pictograph lower down and on the wall beside it. This was curved to match the walls of the main chamber. It was first called the central chamber, and later it was found it had no frame around it. The mechanism had no motor and worked similarly to the wheelless magnetic levitation railroads. We are currently planning to construct a technology adapted by study of this door mechanism. And there is more disclosure of the alleged underground maglev trains, all running at mad speeds below our feet in an extensive network that, to my understanding, also runs under the Atlantic. And this is why you hardly ever see any so-called famous people travelling to and from countries or within. And a further example of the people paying for everything and get no use or benefits from it. The entire airlock chamber rotated like a geared cylinder inside another type of cylinder that formed a centre core, the heart or centre of the lower cabin. Until the 2 openings in the cylinders lined up, the material was so thin that the opening in the inner wall nearly went unseen. Inside the cargo hold were found a number of what appeared to be, scientific work tables and medical examination tables. The dreaded tables, feared and tortured for the rest of their life by certain people anyway, whilst the authorities declared it all a figment of your imagination. Perhaps the smoking gun will be revealed on that here as well. Just as Dr. Bronk was about to suggest that the cargo routinely carried what might be a biological or non-human use, Dr. Van Valkenburg found 14 small tube-like chambers buttressing the walls beside a clamshell couch that looked like it would close to contain a human body. This couch was fitted with hoses for filling it with some liquid or gas when the two sections would come together and seal. A closer look at the sealed tubes, which looked like doors of clothes dryers at a laundromat, revealed that they were a complex form of refrigeration system. 2 tubes were empty, and 12 contained the bodies of what looked like human adults and small children, as well as infants, all frozen as if preserved for specimens. The decision was made to remove these from what had now been nicknamed the smoking gun, and pack them on ice for preservation until a later date could determine if they were aliens or abducted Earth humans. And there you have it, the smoking gun, and the potential the bodies were abducted Earth humans. That's full-on disclosure right there. In the process of transferring the frozen EBE bodies from their capsules in the cargo hold of the Dishcraft to containers of dry ice for shipment, Dr. Bronk, von Rossler, Scherer, and 2 army pathologists from the IPU were amazed to discover that one of the small humanoid adults, similar to the pilots found deceased on the flight deck, had thawed out with a pulse, had limited respiration, and had lived in an unconscious state for several minutes before expiring. The shocked scientists then realized the capsules were actually cryogenic suspension chambers, and that the EBEs were still technically alive inside of them. Although this concept was almost unheard of in Western medicine at this point in time, Dr. Bronk dimly recalled reading about secret experiments conducted in Nazi concentration camps during the war. That's what the report says. What a liar, Dr. Bronk. And the Nazi experiments knew exactly what they were, due to the Nazis, which are largely not German, I might add, working with the highly malevolent Aldebaran group, and in part, whether coerced or not, the Vril group. Dimly recalled my ass. Such experiments had centred inhumanely on the suspending of the vital life signs and their subsequent reanimation by freezing and thawing of the bodies of inmates who were used against their will like laboratory animals. Now, that inhumane suspending of the vital life signs and then reanimation is also performed on the public to this day via MKUltra style research labs and facilities. Their favourite method is repeated drowning of children to fracture their psyche and brain, and so adaptable to the program being installed in them. by various mind control techniques. The Svarli story in Illuminati Part 1 and 2 in our Must Listen To section reveals deeper elements of those practices, including to bloodline family children. Ain't that right, Shane? And yet, by Stockholm Syndrome, he keeps covering up for them. By this time, the scientists had determined that each section of the ship was able to maintain some operating power even after disassembly. A test showed this to be true for the cryogenic capsules as well. Due to the lack of proper facilities at the landing site and the lack of secured holding area for any living EBEs or convalescent provisions, it was decided to remove the entire cryogenic section of the craft and to relocate it to better research and medical laboratories on a military compound of some sort before attempting to restore any of the EBEs to consciousness. The story was quickly circulated that, yes, bodies had been found, all were deceased, and that these would be removed for later analysis. The bodies of the two small pilots were shown to some other members of the recovery team who had heard about them, and then sealed in dry ice chambers, as was the corpse of the EBE who had expired in the cargo hold after thawing. A big display of this was carried out in full view of the other team members, and another dry ice transportation capsules were secretly loaded with dirt and stones before the entire group was loaded into a refrigerator truck labelled high explosives for transport. The rest of the craft in pieces was loaded into flatbed trucks, covered with tarpaulins and labelled explosives. Dr. Oppenheimer arranged for full use and needed remodelling of the restricted Navy Auxiliary Airfield Complex at Los Alamos Base. The convoy proceeded at night and by the most unobserved route possible to these facilities, while units of the IPU Magic Ops team, assisted by Army Airborne Rangers, stayed at the Hart Canyon site to effect the final cleanup operations. The disc craft arrived and was put into secured storage for analysis on April 5th, 1948. Two separate laboratories were set up at the Los Alamos site. One was for the detailed photographing and cataloguing of each component of the disc craft and the effort to decipher the forms of writing found aboard. The second facility was organised around the efforts of teams of doctors led by Dr. Detlev Bronk to attempt the revival of the craft's occupants. Neither group knew what was the purpose or progress of the other's research. Compartmentalisation again. Only Dr. Oppenheimer was in that position, acting as a go-between to see all phases of the work in progress and to disseminate the findings of each to the appropriate investigators within each group. This was done, it was said, in order to limit the risk of information reaching the public and causing a panic situation based upon a fear of undetectable aliens among them. If only they knew. If only they knew. Oh dear. The reason for this, they said, the thoughts of riots and murders was on everyone's mind. And if you believe that statement, you'll believe anything. Eventually, the medical team was able to resuscitate one adult Earth-like humanoid male and 3 Earth-like humanoid infants, all about 6 months of age, 2 male and 1 female. The rest of the infants and 1 short, grey-skinned, large-headed humanoid EBE perished in the attempt to revive them. This was largely the result of Dr. Bronk and Bush having decided to experiment first on the infants, who were of little intelligence value, in the hope of reviving the short EBE and the adult humanoid for a detailed briefing. The adult Earth-like humanoid male turned out to be himself an EBE, but he spoke perfect English with a slight and untraceable accent, and exhibited many telepathic and psychic skills as well. This EBE was in his general appearance completely human. Internally, there were only slight differences in the formation of the heart valves, pancreas, lungs, and he possessed 2 livers and an unfamiliar organ where the gallbladder would be in an Earthman. Also, his digestive and gastrointestinal systems were simpler and less able to process the wide range of foods that Earthmen are used to. He was surprised to discover the scientists had unfrozen him alive, but was otherwise undisturbed to find himself in the company of Earthmen. He stated within minutes of regaining consciousness that his only surprise would have been if the investigator had not chosen to hold him as captive out of your honest curiosity. After a hasty teleconference with President Truman, it was explained to the visitor that if his intentions proved to be non-hostile and he cooperated in an information exchange, he would be granted diplomatic status and would soon be repatriated to his own kind when the arrangement could be made. To this he readily agreed, providing he was not asked to give away any scientific secrets that could alter the course of our natural cultural development. Altogether, the Aztec EBE lived under our protective custody on the Los Alamos complex for nearly a full year, from late April 1948 until March of 1949. After that, he was sequestered at a private safe house set up by Army intelligence in rural Vermont, during which time he met with the President and other top government and military administrators prior to being returned to his people in August of 1949. He gave the scientists and military debriefers a great deal of mostly non-technical information about his civilization and its motives for being on Earth. A total of 683 pages of transcripts were made of recorded conversations. A condensed version of some noteworthy points from these many debriefing sessions follows at the end of this section. The EBE saw little harm in allowing us to keep the remains of his spacecraft for study, since he felt our understanding of it would only gradually be revealing. He did suggest that his people would probably have to drop one in stellar condition into the laps of the Soviet Union, just for the balance of things to be maintained. And he said further, you are welcome to take this up with any higher authority you can find willing to listen to you if you do not approve of this course. The team of scientists were told that the human-like infants were destined for our world anyway, and we were welcome to keep them. I'm going to repeat that again. The team of scientists were told that the human-like infants were destined for our world anyway, and we were welcome to keep them. On August 21st, 1949, the Aztec EBE was returned to his own kind at a meeting site southwest of Kirkland Air Force Base, Texas, and arrangements were made for a return meeting at the same location to open diplomatic relations. And with that, he bade us all farewell. But I guess many of us, including the scientists and military who observed him and them, all thought the same as this song. I'll see you again. I'll see you again. And we did. Far more regular than people realise. You know, because of the mind control program, and people think little green men from Mars, which is another term that came out of Langley, like conspiracy theory, like flat earth. You know, that kind of covers part one of this two-part series. Fairly explosive, fairly mind-blowing, and also thought-provoking in so many ways. It's filled with a lot of hope, but it's also filled with great regrets of what should have been a momentous occasion for the people of this planet to finally have confirmation we're not alone in this universe or time. But that was cruelly snatched away from us all by a few self-appointed and self-serving agenda-based people, in some cases human, and in others not. All content on not only controlling the narrative, but engineering money-based schemes and corporations based on technology garnered from these craft. Technology of which was not made available to the public at large. Despite the public paying for all these operations, agencies, NGOs and research facilities, not to mention the plethora of military installations, both above ground and largely below ground. You're talking about trillions of dollars on black budget to pay for these installations, to save the few, save the ones who will only follow orders, no matter what it is. People who follow orders don't think straight. In fact, in many cases, they're told to not think at all. Follow the plan, no matter what those costs or implications. We the people are not seen in our best light or use when just following orders. We are all a free spirit, and to that is what we must strive to re-establish for us all. The psychological damage done to millions of people around the world due to the point-blank denial of this knowledge and the subsequent ridicule and often banishment of those people has and does still haunt many people to this day. People who saw and experienced things with their own eyes, only to be declared insane, were both anger and exonerate at the same time with this revealing. This led to our national safety being compromised, not only in this country, but all countries, as these same clowns did all kinds of deals for technology with these on and off-world groups, all under the banner of beating the Soviets. The most childish excuse ever. The point being is, Russia has long since had that technology from the ancient past themselves. So it's delusional to think you are competing or getting one over the Russians. And it's child-level thinking and actions, and why so many of the EBE groups think we are a child-level civilization. This event could have sent us on a much better path for humanity, as Part 2 will reveal in greater detail. Instead, it sent us spiralling backwards in terms of development, so the few self-serving people can use it for their own sick and twisted agendas. One of the deals this group did, MJ12, along with President Eisenhower, was an agreement for the use and aid with new technology from the ETs, and in return Eisenhower agreed for 2% of the American public to be abducted for genetic and other experimentation, all done by these off-world entities. Perhaps Eisenhower should have donated some of his own family for the abduction program, and perhaps then we would not have to listen to the sanctimonious claptrap of his great-granddaughter Laura Eisenhower all over the alt media circuit. I've yet to hear her give an apology on behalf of her family to we the people. It's also shameful and extraordinarily arrogant behaviour of a select few on this planet with a designed and deliberate pursuit of becoming a breakaway civilization. It was and is largely at the heart of this matter, and led no doubt to the creation of the also malevolent group known in the alt media circles by two different names, the SSP, SS being the operative letters, or the Alliance, which is actually Alliance, with a Z on the end, not CE. Black Sun. Vast underground cities laced with high-end tech, whilst the surface population has to endure outdated bacteria poop called oil that is at least 110 years out of date, all of it paid for by the public, including the cost of maintaining it. And yet again, one particular organisation in this country and others is central to it all. Like it was revealed in From Russia with Love 7 and several other pieces in my shows, the CIA seems like the central hub for all things that are wrong on this planet. Their now legendary complete disregard to life and humans is for all to see, and not only a blight in this country but around the world. And if we are truly to progress as a species, that particular organisation and its components needs to be dismantled. Central was the right terminology for them, and a heads up for critical thinkers, because wherever there is something bad going on and in this world, that group is the central figure to it all. So much else has been denied to the general public in terms of advancements for humans by these control freaks, in particular in terms of medical advancements. I have witnessed with my own eyes a member of Langley who had his hand blown off completely, and they stitched a new, fully functional hand complete with real skin decades ago. And yet deny soldiers returning from combat the same treatment and restoration of limbs available to them. The same Langley group who caused the combat to begin with in 90% plus of cases, I might add. That is just so wrong on so many levels, and I'm hoping by the full revealing of these shows it brings more light and clarity to and on this subject. Only this time they can't deny it. Why? As this is from the official archives of Ultra Top Secret Clearance, which was known as Majestic Clearance. Oops. I know many of the EBEs have contacted many of us around the world and revealed full disclosure in its raw form. And yet, predictably, the doubting humans wait for somebody else to tell them what they've already seen or experienced, and yet are so ready to believe something not seen or experienced because society told them so. The greatest loss in terms of our species is spiritual development and advancement. They could have taught us so much more in terms of life, living, pursuit of happiness, wondrous experiences of travel both in and out of body. All cruelly snatched away from so many, and for what? For the weak, cowardly and obsessional people to control others. From that perspective, we are no different than the Draco or the Abraxans. A select few wanting control, status and power that is not congruent with the rest of their species. The loss of knowledge, not only gained from EBEs, is the greatest damage, but the loss of our own knowledge passed down from generation to generation is all but lost now as well, due to this same group of humans and off-world entities. So if the EBEs think we're not a fully developed space-based civilization, there is your answer as to why. But it also has to be noted and determined that many of these EBEs presented themselves as our god or gods and created the program called religion. That is an undeniable 100% fact, as you will find out in part 2. And that program alone has done so much to stifle our development here. You have no idea. If anything can be gained from today's show, in particular, is to those who have had experiences and sightings as a full confirmation. And perhaps, I hope, a new belief in and of yourself. Final message to the EBEs is, and I know you're listening, we are not all like the jackass military, agents or government types. Those three groups represent just about the worst aspect of our species, and in essence are a replica of some of the other malevolent off-world species. And like the book says, in our likeness and our image. And those three groups are the antithesis of what it means to be human. I'm aware many of the EBEs have met many of you listening to this show. Maybe you recognise that fact, or in most cases you never, as they passed you in the street. All done by the conditioning of your brain by control freaks to think that they don't exist and we are alone. A word of caution. Not all interactions with them are positive, and at the same token, not all are bad either. I am greatly encouraged by the interactions between the 39 species below our feet, all largely now working together, and their celebrated Independence Day in September of last year. It is something we, as humans in a collective sense, have to work towards building. But perhaps now, more engagement with humans outside of those three circles is the way forward for those who are ready. As we build a network for and by the people of how to operate and be in the right way, just maybe the People's Club network will be the future voice of humanity. That leads to honest, courteous and peaceable interactions with species from other worlds. And for those who do meet them, perhaps this song title is a fitting end to this first part of this show. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.